Hello, everyone. Today, you might have noticed that there's been a change in my podcast name. I'm decided to rename it "How to Maintain Happiness in Your Life" rather than "Peace with Alex." It just seems that as much as I disagree with the term happiness, if I stick to the peace idea, no one will ever find me. So it's more important that I get this message out rather than stick to my principles. So today we're going to discuss a book just came out this year in 2023 called The Good Life, and it's based on probably one of the longest running studies in the world. It's based on a Harvard study of adult development started in 1938, still going on today. And what the study aimed to achieve was, what are the elements in life that make people happy? So I'm going to share my presentation here. And basically what it is the current directors of this study are Robert Waldinger and Mark Schultz. So they decided, we have these decades of research, so why don't we write a book about it? And that way we can share the information, and that will hopefully help people to find more happiness in their life. The key takeaway from this book, even though it doesn't say it on this cover here, is that the most important contributor to someone's happiness is the health of their relationships. So that's really what this book focuses a lot on. And it's interesting because there's a contrast. They start out and they say, okay, well, there was a 2007 survey done among millennials asking them, well, what was their number one goal? 75% of those respondents stated that becoming rich was their number one goal, which is quite out of alignment with what actually will make you happy. It is according to these people, relationships. So anyhow, we'll go on to the first chapter here as to what makes a good life. So basically, this is what we want to do is we want to find meaning, and I've actually covered a lot of it in the introduction, what I was saying. So we want to find meaning in our life. If you're familiar with Viktor Frankl's book, The Search for Meaning in Life, that's very important. And the more you give to, this is a Lao Tzu quote, if you're familiar with Lao Tzu, the more you give to others, the greater your abundance. So this opening chapter is really just an introduction to the study. Basically, it was started by Harvard, as I said. There were two cohorts, I guess. So one of the cohorts was people who were going to Harvard University. So these were people who, I don't want to necessarily say privileged, because during the time of the study, starting in 1938, some of those people who went to Harvard were sponsored under the GI Bill, people coming back from the Second World War, and their education was paid for. But another part of the study did involve people, kids in very poor, I don't remember the name of the area of Boston, but it was a very poor area of Boston. So they followed these two people right up until their death. So it's very, very interesting. And like I said, just to reiterate, it's still going on today. So we're now probably getting into the third generation of study participants. So why is it going backwards? There we go. So basically, again, this book focuses all about relationships in our life. So one of the things that they start out this chapter with, why relationships matter, is that there was a study done, and I'm thinking it was New York City, I can't quite remember, But they asked people to strike up conversations with people on the subway. So what they did was they asked people before they did that, well, how are you going to feel about that? And most people put negative comments. Oh, it's going to be awkward, uncomfortable, and all that kind of stuff. Then these people went out. They struck up some conversations while on the subway. Came back to the study and say, well, how did you actually feel when you struck up the conversation with different people? And then people said they had a very positive experience, right? So what this does is prove that we aren't good at predicting what will make us happy emotionally in terms of the future. So they used the psychological term called affective forecasting. Basically, what that means is how we make predictions about how something will make us feel about a future event. And then getting back to the thing about the key thing about this book is about relationships. But for most people in modern society, what they focus on is money, achievement, and status. Those are the things that they will chase after. And one of the things I think they briefly touch on it, but not in any depth. And I will, in a future talk, I will talk about this. Is that more money does not equal more happiness. And I will state that again, emphasizing the key words. More money does not equal more happiness. So for those people who are poor, they can't afford to keep a roof over their heads or food on the table. Those people are definitely unhappy. When you don't have enough to provide for your basic needs, you're unhappy. However, once certain needs are met, and I would argue, this is not based on fact, but I'm just going to propose that I think it's basically shelter, food, and transport. Once those basic needs are met, then you have diminishing returns going beyond that. So the next time you see like a Mark Benioff, Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk in the news, understand that they aren't any more happier than you if you're someone who has, you can afford your mortgage or rent, keep food on the table, and you're able to get to and from work and get around town when you need to. And this is another thing. You might have heard that there are some people who were born into some very unfortunate and live in very unfortunate circumstances. They are struggling, and yet these people seem to be happy. And this is a key point, is that happiness is really a choice. We often place happiness on external things that happen or our external environment, but there's lots of evidence to show that that isn't the case. It's really an internal state, and we do have the choice. We have the choice to decide whether we're happy or not. And again, this is understand, and I'll hopefully won't harp on this, but this is a research project. So not only do they discuss the research that they're doing, but they bring in all sorts of other research, which we'll go through. So another research study that they did, basically the key conclusion was that our actions and our choices account for only 40% of what makes us happy in life. So this is it's a key thing to keep in mind, is that happiness is always available to you regardless of what's going on in your life. Now I will put some caveats in there, is that I think that there are, like, if you're in an abusive relationship, or there are other certain factors that, yeah, certainly, like people who live in war zones. I mean, they it's kind of hard to make a choice to be happy when you don't know if your house is going to be bombed in the next couple of days. So there are limits to that, but for the most part, yes, our happiness is a choice. It's an internal state. So then, the next thing that they move on to is basically that we have stages, and our relationships change as we go through life. Clearly, because I mean, as children, our relationships are a relationship of dependency on our parents. But as we get older, things change. So they do talk about somebody named Erickson, and Erickson proposed this theory of adult development where life is a series of challenges or crises that we either meet the challenge or we fail to meet that challenge, and that shapes us as we go throughout life. And there was another psychological research, Bernice Newgarden, and what she proposed is that there's a timeline of what I would call social events that will happen through our lives. So a classic example is getting married. So there's a certain window in which most of us will get married, and some of us will go beyond that and maybe get married in our 40s or maybe even our 50s. So, and what that does is that it creates a state where you feel like you're, quote, she uses the term off time. So if you get married at much later in life, you're off time in terms of that. So and the impact that has is that your personal life is out of alignment with societal expectations. However, that being said, I really think that I really encourage people to live their own life. Don't worry about societal expectations, because it's as I go through these talks, it will become more and more apparent that I think what our society expects of us is wonky, basically, to put it lightly. So basically, we'll move into what the stages were. So they skip over the child. I'm sure there's a childhood stage, and it might even be broken up into different stages. But they start at what they call the adolescent stage, which they define as from the ages of 12 to 19. I don't know if this was their term or if they were referring to other research, but it was called walking the tightrope. So basically, for any of us who've been through adolescence, it really is a time about finding yourself, finding about who you are, and it's really a time of exploration. And it is that transitory period from becoming dependent children to independent adults. So they didn't spend a lot of time on adolescence, but they did spend a little more time on young adulthood, which they define as from the ages of 20 to 40. So basically, our key things that we focus on in the when we're young adults is work and family. So we're just starting in our careers. We're maybe we did meet someone, or we're still in the dating pool, and we're trying to work out, well, what's my family life going to look like? And then one of the interesting things that they talk about is that young adulthood is a stage where the concept that you've developed of yourself in adolescence gets challenged, and now you have to keep changing yourself. And it is still very much, I would say, you're still very much in the stage of self-development and growth and trying to really take your place in the world. Then the next stage that they talk about is midlife, which they define as ages 41 to 65. And the key thing in this stage of life is that we're we're now starting to think about matters that are beyond our immediate life, our home life and our work life, and now starting to concern ourselves with the greater world and the greater universe. So we're moving from an inward focus to an outward focus, and they call it stepping beyond the self. We're becoming less self-centered. And then later in life, from 66 onwards, people will focus on what and who matters. And then that tends to be our focus. So and another thing too is that as we progress in life and get closer to death, our priorities will shift. And this goes back to an earlier talk that I did on the top 5 regrets of the dying. That book is very instructive because when you're told that you only have so much longer to live, your priorities will change drastically. And they get a little into it later in the book, but I'll just say it now and then I'll repeat it later, is that we live life like time, like we can bank time. So, and because this is a book about relationships, I'll focus on that. We tend to think, okay, well, at a later point, I'll call that friend. Maybe some point in time in the future, or more importantly, maybe there's a friend I want to see. We'll get together. I'll go over to their place or get together for some beers or whatever it is. But we'll do it next week, and then next week comes, doesn't happen. Then the next week, and then the next week, and then next thing you know, it's years down the road, and you've never really actually met up with that person. So certainly. It's something to be mindful of, especially when it comes to relationships, is that time is not recoverable. Once that time is gone, it's gone. So the next thing they talk about is social fitness. And they use the analogy of we're mindful of, most of us at least, are mindful of how we treat our body. We like to eat healthy, get a little bit of exercise, and we see the importance of maintaining our body. But they're arguing that it's just as important that in as much as we work on our health fitness, that we work on our social fitness. We need to work on that. And going back to that thing about time and reaching out to your friends, that you haven't spoken to in a while, in as much as if we don't exercise muscles, they will atrophy. Our relationships will do the same. When you don't maintain those relationships, they will stale over time, and eventually they will quite honestly die. Relationships. So, and as a personal thing. That is why my last relationship ended, quite honestly. I think it's because we didn't spend any time on the relationship. We spent time together, and that's a difference that I'm talking about here, is that, yeah, it's also important to do things together with your spouse, but it's also important to get together on a regular basis and basically ask the question of each other, how can I... Well, I guess you're more answering the question. So you're answering the question to each other, how can I be a better spouse to you? Am I meeting your emotional needs and your needs to be in the relationship? So what they do, and I'm going to switch screens here for a bit. So I'm going to go to this chart here that they put, and basically what they recommend is look at your 10 closest friends and relatives and put them into one of these quadrants. Could be, hopefully you can see the mouse move, could be here, could be over here, just wherever you feel that they should go. And this will, they call this a social universe. This will tell you where this person fits within your social universe. So obviously, anything in the energizing category, energizing and frequent, maintain those relationships. Energizing and infrequent, you want to make more contacts with these people, right? For the depleting sign, obviously, if it's infrequent and depleting, I don't think you really need to worry about those, but you need to deal with those relationships that are depleting and frequent. What is it that you're going to do about those relationships? So I'm going to turn that off. I'll go back to my presentation. And then what they don't know whether it was their research or some other research, but they categorized relationships into certain, quote, functions. Probably not the most sexiest way to put relationships in, but so they have several functions. So we have relationships that provide us safety and security. We have relationships that provide us learning and growth. We have relationships that provide for emotional closeness and someone who can be a confidant for us. We have relationships that will provide us identity affirmation and shared experiences. So that might seem a little vague to some people. So I would say that those are people like your bridge club or your bowling club. You're having that shared experience together. Then, not surprising, we all have the relationships that provide romantic intimacy. And then you have relationships that provide help or expertise. Those are the people that you call, hey, how do I change a faucet? Or things like that. And then we have relationships that fall into the category of fun and relaxation. So basically that covers the idea of keeping up with our social fitness. So of course it does a very good segue into obviously the relationships that we pay attention to are those relationships that will sustain us. And going back to the key point of this, if we want a happy life, our best investment to a happy life is investing in our relationships. So, and then, like I said, in terms of the time thing, the fact of depleting time, this is where they revisit that idea that time is a one-way arrow. Once yesterday or once today is gone, it's gone. We can't get today back. We can't get last week back, last year, or whatever. And they had an interesting analogy of, imagine if you were born with a bank account, right? And everything you did in life required you to spend money. So when you woke up, you had to pay a bit of money. When you ate, you had to pay a bit of money. When you fell in love, you had to pay a bit of money. When you went out for friends, you had to pay a bit of money. So obviously, and the key thing, I think it makes more sense, my next phrase. The key thing is, you have a bank account, but you have no idea how much money is in there. And once that money is gone, your life is over. So the question is, how would you live your life, right? If you knew that you had all this money, but you didn't know how much, and that basically once that money is gone, you're done, right? So, and basically imagine that money, that's time. And another way that they put it is that for all of us who are alive today, we know that at some point in time, in the future, we will die. We will no longer be on this planet. The thing is, we don't know when that day is. So it's like, well, what do you do with that time between today and the time that you finish, knowing that the time of death is uncertain. So when you put it in that perspective, you really start to realize that time is much more valuable than we give it credit for. So, and then just to reiterate, um, about the time bank, right? And again, it goes back to that thing about banking time, that we think we've got a time bank, but we really don't. So um, anything that you put off into the future, you're not saving yourself any time by doing that. You're just delaying a certain activity. So and and then one of the interesting things that they go into is just uh, is about mindfulness. So they did this study where they asked people, I'm assuming they gave them a journal, they asked people periodically to stop what they were doing and write down what their thoughts were about. And the study found that about 50% of the time people stopped what they were doing, they were thinking about something unrelated to what they were doing in the moment. So basically, half of the time, we're thinking about something in the future or something in the past. So, uh, so for many of us, we're not quite in the present moment, and that is going to be something that I'll talk about a lot. Is that the present moment is the most important point in time that we have. And then they start to go into, this is of course called attention to relationships. So paying attention to someone, they explain, it is the most basic form of love. And basically, and ideally, with our social interactions, we want that to be in person. And research even shows that we need that physical proximity, that touch and physical proximity to get the benefits, the emotional, psychological, and biological benefits of a social interaction. So when you go to the other extreme, and it's a unfortunate byproduct of modern life, is that a lot of our social interaction takes place online through social media, but research clearly shows that it does not provide us the same benefits as when we're together in person. And not only that, but these devices that we bring with us. I mean, there's literally studies that show people fall into extreme anxiety when they don't know where their cell phone is. And you'll often see when you go out, actually, when you're in a social environment, look around, and you'll see how many people are just, they're together. It's a group. You can tell it's a group of people, but they're all just staring at their cell phones, right? So it's like, well, how beneficial was that social engagement to that group of people, right? So getting back to when you're out with your friends or family, I would strongly recommend that you basically have a policy where devices basically get put away. You can't pull out your devices. It's face-to-face conversation. And then another thing, and they sort of expand on this a little bit throughout this book, but in your social interactions, be mindful of the person and be curious about the people in your life, and ask yourself in the social engagement or interaction, not engagement, but interaction, is that ask yourself, is there anything about this person I haven't noticed before? And then I would also add to that, think about their lives and what they do and the interests that they have, and ask yourself, is there anything that I could ask them about their life that I haven't asked before, that I don't know anything about? And then that'll open up conversation. And another thing too, research shows that people like talking about themselves. So if you do that, that will that person will feel much more positively towards you. But because of course it makes sense that we don't like to hang around with selfish people that just talk about themselves all the time. It has to be a two-way street. So usually in a social interaction, it's much more beneficial when that person shows an interest in us and we reciprocate. We show an interest in them. That's something to build on. And then they move into how it's important to, they use this term empathic effort. So again, they go into discuss a research thing. So they took couples and they asked the couples to come into the lab, the psych lab, with a topic that's been eating away at the relationship. And then what they did was that they observed the couple having a discussion, or basically, I'm sure many times it was an argument. And then after the argument, the couple, both either side of the spouses would fill out a questionnaire, basically at the end of the day, saying how well did it go. When they reviewed the data, the interesting thing that it was more important that the person who was speaking to the person listening, it was more important that the person was making an effort to understand, more so than it was in the accuracy of being able to understand what that person was feeling or what their perspective was. So in a relationship, empathic effort is key. You want to, it doesn't matter how accurate you are, but people, at least statistically speaking, people tend to be more concerned that you are making an effort to understand how they feel and what their perspective is on life. So the next thing they go into is facing the music. So it should come as a surprise to nobody that in any relationship there's going to be conflict. And how we deal with that conflict will, of course, have a very strong influence with what the health of that relationship is. And that one of the things, and to what you definitely don't want to do is ignore the problems that you have with your relationships, to the point where in the study, it being a lifelong study, and now over 2 or 3 generations, they found that the middle-aged people who were avoiding their relationship problems, they found reported a lot less satisfaction in life when those people were revisited 30 years later. So, and then one of the things that they go into is not reacting. They don't use this term, but I use the term trigger. We all have triggers. And if you haven't listened to my other talks, basically what a trigger is when you react in a way that's disproportionate to the situation that you're dealing with. And usually that's a result of something that's happened in the past. And there's nothing inherently wrong with it, because what happens is the brain wants us to be safe. We have a survival instinct. So if something has happened to us in the past that caused our brain to register danger, then that gets registered in our memory bank, and some people would even argue in our body. Some people have had situations where they get touched in a certain place in their body, and they have a crazy emotional reaction to it. I don't want to use crazy because I don't want to brand the person as being crazy, but it's just a really intense, that's the word, that would be a better word. Somebody touches them somewhere and they have an intense reaction to that. And I'm not necessarily saying in a sexual manner, because that would be the first thing, but maybe even in other ways too, right? So basically, you want to get away from reacting according to your triggers and just doing knee-jerk reactions to things that happen in life. So, and the best way to do that is to slow things down. And that's how you know that you're being triggered, is because you will actually witness your emotions go from 0 to 100 in a split second. You don't even realize that it's doing that. So basically, they came up with this WISER model. So I'm going to share my other screen again. So the WISER model, WISER, watch, interpret, select, engage, reflect. So basically, what this is that watch is just simply observing. So as those emotions bubble up, don't even question why or how or what's going on. Just take a step back and just observe those emotions coming in. Observe how the other person's behaving. Observe the environment that you're in, and just take in information before you move on to the next stage, which is interpret. So basically, and again, don't ignore that emotion. Emotion, I'll say it many times, emotion is energy in motion. Emotions are the things that tell us that we need to pay attention to this. So never suppress your emotions. But so basically, when you're interpreting, look at why am I feeling this way? What's the root of this? What am I really feeling here? And try to also interpret. Okay, well, where is this person possibly coming from? One of my favorite quotes. I haven't actually read the book, but I will discuss it in a future point. Is the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. It was written many years ago, but one of my favorite quotes is, first seek to understand and then be understood. And I think that's very important, is that when you're in an interaction with someone, focus first on understanding where they're coming from. And then once you feel you're sort of getting a handle on where you're coming from and where they're coming from, then you can move on to the select stage. And that's basically looking at, what are your options? What can I say here? What can I do? Is there anything that I can say or do that will improve this situation? And then weigh the pros and cons of things. And they don't really talk about it here, but I would say don't discount the fact that sometimes no action is the best action. Sometimes people just want to be heard, and sometimes all they're looking for is just your presence in the matter, and they just need someone who can listen and empathize with them. So, and then the next thing is that once you've weighed your options, what you can do, and you've decided on a course of action, not necessarily restricting it to just doing things, but what are you going to say or what are you going to do in this situation? Then actually do it. Go ahead and say whatever you think is best at the moment, and then, or do whatever you think is going to be best at the moment, and then of course reflect. So of course, it's going to go one of 3 ways, I would argue. It may have a neutral effect that you may not have had. It may not have had any improvement or benefit or harm. That's the words I'm looking for. Or it may have done something so positive. So if it's done something positive, then again, put that in your memory banks, and maybe that's something you can draw on a later point. Or if it's had a negative thing and if the interaction started to go sideways, then learn from that and say, well, what could you have done differently so that it doesn't go sideways next time? So now I'm going to go back to the back to the thing. So the next chapter goes into probably the most important relationship that any adult has, and that's our intimate relationship. And basically, when we're in an intimate relationship, we have to open ourselves up. A lot of people will describe intimacy as into you, see me. And the thing is that it's scary for many people. A lot of people have problems with intimacy because there's that risk of being hurt. But that's the double-edged sword, is that in order to deepen the relationship, you have to become vulnerable. You have to open up yourself to that hurt and take that risk. So what they said is that the keystone of intimacy is the feeling of knowing someone and of being known. And I would argue this really is a lifelong process. I don't believe that we could ever truly know someone, and no one could ever truly know us. But I do argue that we need to work at that and just do our best at opening our hearts and being as vulnerable as we can be in our intimate relationships. And then they talk into the thing about attachment theory. And the interesting thing is, it now is discussed in marriage counseling. It's been applied to, but it started out actually as childhood attachment, how the childhood was attached to the primary caregiver. And the person who did this research was called Mary Ainsworth. And basically how the study went was that a child, and we're talking a very young child, like 3-4 years old, toddlers, I guess, toddler age. So a caretaker, could be the mother or the father, whoever was their primary bond, was brought into a room and there were toys around. And I hope I don't get this wrong. I'm going to try to remember it. And then what would happen was a complete stranger would come into the room. And then the primary caretaker would leave. And now the child was left alone in the room with a stranger, someone that they didn't know. So typically what would happen was the child would get upset. They would start crying because the primary caregiver was no longer in the room. So then the primary would come back in the room. And then basically the key point was seeing how soon would this toddler return to a state of normalcy, right, when this caretaker came back. And basically there were 3 possible reactions that they found with these toddlers. So children who had what they called a secure attachment, when the caretaker came back in the room, they would eventually calm down and come to a state of equilibrium in fairly short order, right? And then they moved to the anxious attachment. So basically, the caretaker would come back in, but the child would go on crying and they would be upset for an extended period of time. And then there was the avoidant. So in the avoidant attachment, that the caretaker would come in, and it's like the caretaker was never there. They just keep the toddler would just keep playing with their playing with their toys as if nothing had ever changed. So getting back into the and this also, just to drive home the point, is the fact that this happens in adult relationships. That ideally what you want is a secure relationship, so that when there's something that upsets the attachment between 2 people, and then you become reattached, then you settle back to a state of attachment in short course. But there are people who have an avoidant attachment style, are always worried about their partner leaving them. And on the flip side, the interesting thing is people have an avoidant attachment style in a relationship will always think that the other person is leaving them, so they never get truly connected to it. So basically, getting back into, how do we build up our intimate relationships? So the most important things that they say that we need to focus on are the empathy and affection. And also going back to the previous chapter, don't avoid conflict in a relationship. Try to find a way how to resolve your conflicts in a relationship in such a way that the both of you come out better at the end of it. And sorry, just bear with me a second. So basically, getting back to the point of vulnerability, the vulnerability has to be mutual. That's what will contribute to a healthy relationship. And getting back to that empathy and affection, you need to put attention into the relationship. And that goes back again to what I was saying a while ago, is that you need to invest time into the relationship aspects of the relationship, which may sound weird, but what I mean by that is, again, asking the question or answering the question to each other, how can I be a better spouse to you? So, and then basically, not surprisingly, research shows that those people who are in healthy relationships, they report, of course, not only more happiness, but also more physical health. So, being in a toxic relationship will actually have a negative impact on your health over time. So the next thing they go into, so we move from probably our most intimate relationship to our second most intimate relationship, and that's with our family, right? Those are the people who've known us our entire lives. And, the families are usually the best ones at pressing on our trigger buttons. And not saying that they necessarily do that deliberately, but outside of an intimate relationship, I would argue that the second most common place that we get triggered is in our family dynamics. So, and then basically, just bear with me a second. I don't know if you guys can see that, but I have a pop-up from my antivirus here. Basically, what we need to do as we grow up through our family, in our family environment, we need to, our relationships will change, of course, because, when we're young and we're living with mommy and daddy there, and we're have relationships with our siblings, it's going to be a lot different than when we're teenagers, than when we're young adults and we're working and we're having a family, and then at the empty nest stage, and then into retirement. So there's all this change throughout our life that we need to be adaptable. We can't look at our family today as if we were in the environment when we were kids or as adolescents. So that's, of course, assuming that that's not the case. That's assuming that you're now independently, you have your own family, and your family members, your siblings have family. They have families of their own. So one of the interesting things of the importance of family is that they, in this book, they talk about some other longitudinal studies that looked at happiness. And one of the studies was done in Hawaii. It was actually, they took recruited children from a pretty poor neighborhood. And Um, and then they follow them throughout their lives from, very young children right into adulthood. So very longitudinal studies. And they found, interestingly enough, because you would think that one of the common myths, I guess, that we have in society is that those people who come from like ghettos, very poor neighborhoods, those are the people who end up poor, and statistically speaking, there might be some truth to that, but they grow up poor. They may have problems with the law, addiction, dysfunctional families, and stuff like that. In this study, they found actually that a third of the children that they followed grew up to be attentive, kind, and emotionally well-adjusted adults. And they asked themselves, well, what contributed to that? Well, they put it down to two things. And again, this is had to do with their families. So the one thing was there was a consistent presence of at least one caring adult throughout their childhood into adulthood. So that's very important. And I would say I've dated, well, probably most of the women I've dated have been adoptees. And I would say that those people who have been given up for adoption, especially if they were adopted into another dysfunctional household, it can really have very negative impacts on your life. Of course, we've all heard stories of where people have been adopted into very loving and caring homes and turned out great. And then the second thing that they talked about is that the family basically created an environment where people, the children, could acknowledge their challenges and talk about them openly. So they were able to, I guess, basically develop healthy coping mechanisms, so that as they got older, they were able to cope with the difficulties in life. So, and then I think in this own study, they found that men who had closer and warmer experiences in early life were more likely to connect with, depend on, and support their partner in their old age. So really, it's something that, though that environment that you had in childhood will basically set you up for what your relationship is going to be like when you're in retirement. So one of the things that they talk about is, again, this is a common theme here, is your triggers, your ability to, another way to put, to talk about dealing with your triggers is your ability to deal and process your emotions. So that's very key to having healthy relationships. And then they talk about people who have had a lot of negative experiences in their lives, and that enough positive experiences in your life will actually wipe out the negative experiences. So, and you may have heard of stories like that, or maybe even people you know personally, that they went through a very tough childhood and maybe even a tough young adulthood. But you look at them now and they're actually quite happy and very well balanced, and they have great relationships, and it's because of those positive experiences over time do wipe out the negative experiences that you've had in your past. So basically, what they talk about next in this chapter is about being mindful. And I think this really goes beyond. I mean, they're talking, it is in the chapter of family matters, but I think it goes beyond that, is that be mindful and be grateful of the positive experiences that you've had with people, friends or family, or even work colleagues, right? And then when people behave in a way that that make you feel good, uh, be open about it and be expressive and say and acknowledge that person did that, because we all I think it is human nature that we want to be good to other people, right? And if you tell someone that, hey, what you did there, really, I really appreciated it, or it made me feel good, they're going to take that on, and it's going to be positive reinforcement for them to do more of that behavior. And then also be mindful of when people behave differently than what you were expecting. And I would caution against saying that people necessarily hurt us with bad intentions, with maliciousness. I think very many times in our intimate relationships and in friendships and our family, that people do things out of mindlessness that hurt others. So I would say that in dealing with things like that, never assume right off the bat that something was done out of maliciousness. Try to understand why that person did that. And there is that phrase: the the path to hell is paved with good intentions, or something like that. I think I'm butchering that phrase, but you get the point. Is that many times bad things are done with good intentions. And then, of course, the other thing too is avoid extremes of you always or you never, because we're human beings, and I would argue that we're notoriously inconsistent. So just understand that even if you may have that feeling, although, well, that person never does this, more than likely, if you look into the reflect on it, it's probably never is probably not the right word. It's probably more consistently not, but never is not quite the right word. So then they give 3 tips for strengthening your family bonds. First and foremost, and I would say that this doesn't only apply to family, this applies to everything. Accept people for who they are. I'll say this probably many times, is that I think differences are what makes life beautiful, what makes the human experience wonderful. And sometimes that can be the way others people speak and behave goes against our expectations. And rather than get angry or react against that, accept people, and more importantly, try to understand, well, where were they coming from? Because I've even had situations in my own personal life where somebody did things that ticked me off, and I took the time to understand, well, what were you trying to do there? And they literally thought they were doing the right thing. And I had to educate them and say, no, actually, the consequences of what you're doing is this. And they go, oh, okay. And then they had no idea. It was just, I would just say it's unawareness. I don't even want to use the term mindlessness, but it's just unawareness. They were unaware. And once I was able to educate them on it, I never saw that behavior again. So, and then the other thing too, and this goes back to the attention to relationships, is, and it's, I would admit, in my own family, I have no family members who live in Toronto here. I literally have, give you an idea, I've got a sister who lives I only have sisters. Got a sister who lives in Newfoundland. Got a sister who lives in the Ottawa area. I got a sister who lives in Saskatchewan, and I've got a sister who lives in British Columbia. So my family is the only way it could be more spread out, and I know many people are in this situation, is if my family were spread out internationally. So I'm just saying that I understand and I can appreciate that this is more difficult said than done. But for those family members that you can get together in person, try to do that and try to do that. Make an effort. Try to do that on a regular basis. And that as life changes, try to figure out how you can maintain that in-person togetherness. And just to reiterate too, when you are together, put the devices away. Sit down for a family meal, no devices, where you can just enjoy the food, have discussions, and just enjoy each other's company. And then the third thing is just to be cognizant of the fact that your family members, we all are going through struggles that you may not know about. And I would say that's true for my family. I have discussed personal issues that I was going through that that basically, well, at the end of the day, I sort of lost contact with them. And it was because I was going through some hard times. And they interpreted that to mean, oh, well, I just didn't care, but it wasn't that. And I told them what was going through, and they went, oh, I had no idea. So it's important to just be mindful of that. And I would also add to that, if the family member's ready, try to be a sounding board for them. We all need support when we're going through hard times. So then we move from the second most intimate relationship to, I would say, fourth, actually. So I would argue that your spouse, that's your most intimate. Your family is the next intimate. Your friends are the next intimate. And then your work connections are the fourth intimate thing. So just bear with me a second. So basically, if you want to develop good relationships at work, and you'll often see that the bosses will often encourage group projects because it accomplishes two things for the organizations. The first thing, of course, is you get something accomplished. But more importantly, the second thing is that you build relationships at work. And I would say the third thing, too, is that, when you have several people bringing their own perspective to a problem, more often than not, you're gonna come out with a better solution than if just one person does. So, and then also they, even though it's within the chapter of Good Life at Work, they talk about how we react when we have a bad day at work and we come home. So studies show that for women, when they have a bad day at work, they will come home and they will be angry. They will carry that anger into the household. And if they don't deal, I would argue, if they don't deal with the emotions in a healthy way, then what might end up happening is that woman will get into an argument at home, and the reality is the argument has nothing to do with the actual situation at hand. It's just that they're carrying over the argument. In contrast, men, when they have a bad day at work, they'll withdraw. So if a man has a bad day at work, they'll come home, they'll play video games, or they'll, watch TV or something like that. They'll do that. So basically what they're saying is that neither one of those are a good way to do it. When you have a bad day at work, try to process it when you come home and sit down with your spouse or someone if you happen to be working alone, if you happen to, living alone, of course, doesn't help. But if you live with someone who is not your spouse, that's the point I'm trying to make. Hopefully you're in a situation where, hey, you mind sitting down with me? I had a rough day at work. I need to talk about it. And then that will help you process the emotions of your bad day at work. And then that way you don't carry it into areas of your life that it shouldn't be there, right? So, and then talking through your bad day at work, that would allow you to process the emotion and then let go of it. So, and then the other thing too that's important at work, and hopefully you're in a situation like this, is that you have a mentor-mentee relationship. That's very important because you learn the ropes, but you also of work, but you also develop a relationship. And then I would also argue, and in many cases I've heard this time and time again, that the mentor actually gets stuff out of it because the mentee sometimes will have a different perspective on a situation. And I really do think in any teaching situation, the learning is very much a two-way process. I truly believe that. I mean, for the most part, it's the teacher passing on knowledge to the student, but in many cases, the teacher does learn from the student. So they go through some tips on how to improve your relationships at work. So think about the people that you enjoy most at work, and then think about, okay, are you acknowledging and appreciating them? Are you spending time with them? Are you giving them attention, right? So if there's someone you really like at work, but you've never gone for lunch with them or bought them a coffee or sat down for a coffee in the lunchroom or anything like that, maybe reach out to them and say, hey, and I would say that's especially true if you work in different departments, but you somehow, you're, for lack of a better word, you're vibing with someone who's not in your department. Go up to them and say, hey, let's go for coffee. And then the other thing too is think about people who are different from you and try to develop relationships with those people and see if there's something you can learn from them, right? And sometimes I'll give you a good example is that you might be an introvert and there might be someone at work who's an extrovert. This may be a little difficult, but it would be easier the other way around, of course. But if you're the introvert and there's someone who's like an extrovert, try to make a connection with them, and you'll find that you'll start to learn the benefits of being an extrovert, and they will actually start learning the benefits from you of being an introvert. Doesn't necessarily mean that you'll change, but research does show that an introvert can, in fact, display or at least act. I think that's a better way to put it. An introvert can act in an extroverted way, and actually they will see that there's benefit from them, but they will never be a natural at it. So it's it's not, the introversion and extroversion is not highly rigid, as one would think. So, and then and pretty much that's it. They belabor some of these points here, but basically that's the thing, is that if there's someone at work that you're vibing with, pay more attention to that. And if there is someone that seems different from you, work on developing a relationship with that person. So then the next thing that they talk about, this chapter wasn't a very long one, but is about friends, our friendships. So So basically, and I would argue that at least in Western society, um, if you're a working adult, it's very hard to maintain friendships. Some people are good at it, but basically, often the majority of your focus is work and then your family. And I mean your nuclear family, your personal family. Uh, so um, so it's but it is important to develop a social network. Um, uh, quantity is not as important as quality. It's better to have whatever you're comfortable. There are some people who are much happier with 20, 25 acquaintances. And there are other people who are happy with just 2 to 3 really good friends. I fall into the second category. So, and to give you an idea of how important it is, I believe I can't remember if it was the Second World War or the Vietnam War, but they were following these veterans, how they were doing after they came back from the war, and how well they were getting over their PTSD. And they found that one of the key predictors of the veteran getting over their PTSD was how positive their friendships were. I guess in when they were in combat, but also I would argue probably more importantly afterwards. That seemed to really have a very huge mitigating impact on the severity of their PTSD. And then they go into how women and men tend to organize their friendships. Or I don't know if organize is the right word. It's more approach would be better. So men tend to approach their relationships or their friendships around activities. So I drive motorcycle. I have a friend who's a motorcycle buddy of mine, and it's an activity. We get together and we drive around town on our motorcycle. For women, they tend to approach their relationships as emotional attachment. So that's just don't know if there's anything really to be. Well, I guess there is to be learned. So if you're a man and you're in a heterosexual relationship with a woman, understand that your wife's friendships are going to revolve around the emotional connections that they have, right? So you may be looking at the relation. Why do you hang out with that person? You've got nothing in common. That's how a man would think, but it's like, well, no, there's an emotional connection there that you don't see, and vice versa. If you're a woman, and you're looking at your husband's friendships, understand that the friendships around activities, and that will give you a better insight into that. So that is. They talk about that as more the external view, right? But then they start to go into research that started to dig a little deeper into what men and women really want from relationships. And it actually turns out to be the same thing. It's just externally, it just looks different. So men and women do both want emotional support, confidence, and they want that emotional bond with someone. It's just done in different ways. So then basically they just do take in give 3 tips to how to improve your friendships. So the first thing is to listen to your friends. So I've heard this said many times. God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth, right? So it's very, very important to do listening, and listening's an important skill. That active listening, that really listening to understand. And then if you have any, the second tip would be if you have any friendships that have sort of hit a sour patch, do your best to mend it. Reach out, apologize if you need to, and try to find some common ground and rebuild that relationship. And then the other thing too is don't allow your friendships to become routine. Basically, try to switch things up a little bit. And that especially goes back to as things change in your life. Sometimes a relationship will atrophy because the activity you were going to or doing together rather no longer makes sense in the new environment. So you don't do that anymore. But it's important that when the environment changes to try to figure out, okay, well, if that activity doesn't work anymore, let's try to find something new. So, and then the last thing, and this is a common thing, it's never too late to be happy. I don't think I made the note here, but they did talk about somebody who they were following in their middle age. This guy was depressed, didn't have any friends, lonely, and just was scoring very low on the happiness index. And then he retired and he didn't know what to do, so he formed, I can't remember what kind of club it was, but he like bowling or bridge or something like that. And out of that activity, he started to make friends. And he started to make very good friends. And it turned out from retirement up into his, can't remember if the guy died during the thing or not, but basically in his retirement years, he was reporting one of the highest levels of happiness among the research participants. So basically that's a point. It's never too late to be happy. You can always change things, right? And then, and basically regardless of where you are in life, you can always make changes to develop more healthy relationships. And then one of the things that they argue, and I'm completely in agree with them. Have you ever heard of the 3 R's in school, the reading, writing, and arithmetic or maths if you're in England? We should really, for children, add in a 4th RO, and that's reading, writing, arithmetic, and relationships. And I truly believe that. When I was in school, there wasn't a lot taught about relationships or marriage or anything like that. I don't know what it is like today, but I certainly do hope that for the kids in school that they're being taught how to have happy relationships, both in friendships and in more intimate relationships. So, because that is one of the biggest contributors to your happiness, as this whole research project shows and the book shows. Relationships are the key component that determines whether or not we'll be happy in life. So basically, and also in terms of resiliency, it really is our friendships that will help us ride through the rough patches in our life. So, and then the last thing, that would be the last chapter actually. So going back, I'm going to turn that off and get back to the thing. Sorry for the lighting, it's getting a little dark here, but so basically that's it. I will put the link to the book on Amazon in the description. I strongly recommend you get this. I thought basically my feeling was when I picked up the book and before I started reading it, I thought there'd be a whole list of things. Oh, well, if you want to be happy, there's this, and this, and there'd be different things. I was not at all expecting that it's one thing only that determines your happiness in life, and that's your relationships. So I will leave it at that. Basically, look at your life, go through that quadrant thing that I showed earlier, map out your relationships, and think about Think about who you need to reach out to more, what relationships you want to develop. And to a certain extent, they don't really get into this, but try to figure out a way how to deal with the toxic relationships in your life. Clearly, those aren't the ones that you want to put more time and attention into. And depending on the circumstance, and I'll probably will do a talk about that, how to deal with toxic people in your life. Because I do think, and I don't want to ramble on too much, I think it has to do with the nature of the relationship. So I'll leave it at this. If it happens to be family members or children or parent who are toxic in your life, you're faced with a choice, and a very, very difficult choice is either, do I engage with them and get hurt, or do I cut them out of their life and be hurt because I miss them? As you know, as toxic as they are, you know, they're family. And so, there are ways to deal with that, because you don't want to do either extreme. There is a happy middle that you have to find. So, all right, thanks everyone for listening. This is a new channel, so if you got something out of this video, then please hit the like button. And if these videos are doing something for you and you're learning something, then please subscribe, and then you get notified when I put new stuff out. So take care, everyone, and stay happy.